What not to wear? Oh my God. That is just all not important. And she talks about perimenopause and menopause and menopause. And I just really enjoyed that second book, We're Gonna Need More Wine. Nope, that was the first one. And then the third mom has a connection to the school, has a connection to, I feel like I should tell you their names. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse, and welcome to part 2 of what I read in February. So full disclosure, I have been playing with my camera for way too long because I feel like the background looks crooked, but at this stage of the game, I'm just going with it because I can't even tell anymore. But I read 4.5 books in the second half of February. I wound up DNFing a book, but all in, I had a really great month and I just want to jump right into it. So the first 2 books I read I'm going to talk about together because they are a duology, and I have done something that I haven't done in a really, really, really long time. And I actually read 2 books in a series back to back, and I just needed to know what was going to happen next. So without further ado, I read Creep and Freak by Jennifer Hillier. So these are her first 2 books, and if you guys have been following me, then none of this is coming as a surprise to you guys, but I am legit obsessed with Jennifer Hillier. And in anticipation of her new book coming out this summer, needed a minute, needed a beat, I decided to go back and go through all of her backlist because I was very lacking in reading her backlist despite the fact that I had them. So I did read Wonderland towards the end of last year, and then I wound up picking up a copy of The Butcher. I don't know if you guys can see it up here, you can't. And then I have Freak and Creep. So anyway, that is just all not important. So I feel like it's going to come as no surprise to say that I was not disappointed at all in these books. I loved them. I love everything about Jennifer Hillier. I told you guys this many times before. Jar of Hearts was her first book that I read, which is so deliciously dark and messed up. And I feel like it goes to such dark places that I loved. And I was curious to see where it all began. And it's all here from the very, very start. And I'm not going to lie, there were so many moments, I feel like in both of these books, where I was just blown away by just how dark and twisted she goes with a lot of things. And I feel like as a writer, there is no holding back. There is no fear. There is no stifling what she wants to put out on the page. And I have read so many interviews with her and followed her for so long that I understand so much of her writing journey and writer hat on. I just love just everything she represents as just a fearless, all-in kind of a writer. So I'm going to say little because, you know, it's a duology, so I don't want to ruin anything. But the premise of Creep is we meet a professor at a college outside of Seattle, and it's Dr. Sheila Tao, and she's a psych professor, an expert in human behavior, and she is dating someone, but she also is engaged in like a 3-month affair with her teaching assistant, Ethan. And when the book opens, Sheila's boyfriend has proposed to her, and she has decided, I need to stop having an affair with my TA. I'm like all in committing to my now fiance. And she lets Ethan know this. And Ethan is not taking it very well at all. Not really pleased with being dumped by Sheila. So this book definitely is a, like, if I can't have you, no one can kind of a book. And I hesitate to say much of anything at all going into this because I was fairly blind beyond that general premise of it and some things I've heard her talk about in interviews about Sheila and her background. So I did know some things going in, but I really think that this is a book and a series that you are best served going into very blind. But what I will say is this is definitely not going to be a for everyone series. It is really dark, you guys. There are some very messed up things that happen in this book. So we do get partial police investigation. We get a little bit of like amateur detective-ish in that we have Sheila and like people in her circle who are trying to figure out some things that are going on. And this is really hard to talk about without saying anything because I just don't want to hint. I loved these characters. I compulsively read these books. Like I needed to know what was going to happen next. And I feel like I said this in a different video. I think I probably said it when I like hauled Freak, and I had read Jennifer Hillier saying this because someone was asking if this was a series, and she said, you know, it takes place in the same universe, but not necessarily. I swear I read that somewhere. You could read this without reading Creep, but it's like, I feel like it's just not going to have the same impact for sure. And I feel like it's not going to make as much sense. So my advice would be just read them in order as they were meant to be, because there are characters who cross over. We get some new characters in Freak as well, but the stories are definitely tied together, and the impact of Freak won't make sense without Creep, or it's sort of like you'd be missing out on some of it. So it's not even like a Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones, Malibu Rising, where it's like the same universe and you won't necessarily not get the story, but you'll miss the Easter eggs. Like, these are like same characters overlapping, same place. And I want to say Freak takes place maybe like 8 months after Creep ends. So it's not too far after the fact, but all that to say, if there was ever any doubt, which there never was, about my obsession with Jennifer Hillier, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So I am going to read The Butcher next of hers, is my plan before I dive into her new book, Things We Do in the Dark. So that comes out this summer. But you guys, I cannot say enough great things about her. I just think she's such a brilliant, talented author. And she just twists and turns, and I feel like she writes such sharp, concise, like, it's dialogue and pace and the way that it moves, and she does such authentically messy people. And I like that she has characters who make bad choices and they don't necessarily apologize for them, or there isn't exactly like redemption arcs for everyone. Like, people live with the mistakes they made, people live with the choices they make, and it's not to say that there are no redemption for anybody, or that there's no understanding of people, or that there's no empathy or sympathy for people, but there is a lot of it where it's just, they just always feel very human to me. And I felt that way when I read Wonderland, and I felt that way when I read Little Secrets, and I feel like she just puts very realistic people on the page and allows people to be messy and allows people to say and do bad things. And like, by bad things, I don't mean like the murdery stuff, but I think it's an honest reflection of how people are in real life. And she doesn't hesitate to sort of show, you know, everybody can have an ugly side, everybody can have a dark side. And it doesn't necessarily make you all good or all bad. It's not black and white. Like, there's just so much gray to things. And I also love that she will have characters do things that maybe in your dark moments you think of doing. And if, you know, whether it's, not, again, not that I'm saying murder, but the choices people make or the lengths that people will go to, and I'm sort of talking about all of her books holistically at this point, she doesn't shy away from going to dark places. And when people sink to sort of their darkest, most desperate moments, she doesn't shy away from showing that. And I just love it. I just love it so much. And again, if anybody out there has been following me and you're like, didn't she have a different version of Creep? Yes. So I bought the mass market paperback when it was re-released last year, and it has a new foreword from her, which I always like to read. And it's actually very interesting to read it now, because she's very much like, if you told me 10 years ago I would be doing this, like, that's kind of crazy. But then I had a hard time reading it. This is such book snob stuff. And I had purchased this, and then I wound up finding this. So I bought it. So yeah, I know, it's insane. Yes, I wanted them to match. Yes, I love this book so much. Yes, I will be reading it again. And yes, I highly, 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 hugely always recommend, if you are in it for the darkness and the twists, I would recommend Jennifer Hillier to you. The next book I listened to, and it's Gabrielle Union's second memoir, and it is You Got Anything Stronger. So I read her first one, We're Gonna Need More Wine, at the beginning of February, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed her story. I really enjoyed so much of that book. I did mention that there were parts of that book that I felt were unnecessarily crass for me, but again, maybe I'm being uptight, I don't know. But I did feel like this one had like a similar but slightly different tone to it. And I very much enjoyed this book as well. And I don't know if I talked enough sort of about trigger warnings that are in her first memoir. And I typically don't talk about trigger warnings when it comes to fiction books, because a lot of times I feel like some things that are revealed are actually spoilers in books. But for the sake of this, I did want to mention she talks in more detail about her sexual assault in the second book. She talks about her struggle with IVF. She talks about miscarriage. She talks about depression. She also gives trigger warnings in the book herself. She talks about suicide in the book. She also touches on family struggles that she has had. She talks about her husband retiring from the NBA. Like, there's also some levity and some light and some funny moments to this book, but there are also some very grounded moments in talking about when her daughter came out as transgender. She continues to talk about racism and both more recent things that have happened and, again, reflecting back on things that have happened. So the first book is not sort of a like birth to that time in her life. She jumps around all over the place, and she does that again in this book. And that's part of what I really enjoy about it, is that you continue to get vignettes from different parts of her life. So it's not a linear story, but you get to see, again, not her whole story, because how could anyone tell their whole story, but these highlights and how they have impacted. And again, there's some real kind of funny moments to things too. And there is a little bit of bathroom humor, which is not really my thing either, but at the same time, I was like here for her whole story. And just a very interesting reflection back on characters she played. And like, she talks a lot about Isis from Bring It On, and kind of writes like an open letter to her, apologizing to her for things that as an actress she feels like she should have fought harder for at the time, and reflecting back on the movie now. And it's just really, really interesting. So again, I did the audiobook. She narrates it again herself. I highly recommend the audiobook. I wouldn't even say like particularly for the funny parts, because the funny parts for sure, but I feel like even with the really difficult parts, hearing her voice and just, there's just something different about it for me to listen to a nonfiction book on audio than to read it, that I feel like makes it resonate in a whole different way, and particularly when it is the author doing the reading. But in terms of, so I talked about this with the first book. So when she was, I want to say 19 years old, she was raped in the shoe store that she was working at, and she was closing up at night. And in the first book, she talks about the rape itself in very graphic detail. And then she talks about sort of reflecting back on it. But in book number 2, she talks about literally like the days and months afterwards. And she makes a point of saying, you know, people talk about, you know, the before and when it happened, and then, you know, down the road when you have a much different perspective. But she really talks about those first few weeks and those first few months. And it's just so gut-wrenching to listen to. And, you know, similarly, when she talks about her struggle with IVF and miscarriages, and these are not things that I have personally experienced, but listening to her story, I feel like for other people who have gone through that, I feel like there's a lot of compassion and understanding and relatability to it. But she just tells her story in such a human, beautiful, sort of no holds barred, not sugarcoating anything kind of a way, which I really appreciate. And I mentioned this again, I believe in the first video, or perhaps in like my vlog. It reminded me in many ways about the Jessica Simpson book, where she just doesn't hold anything back and sort of reveals things that I was surprised that she had revealed, and talks about things that I wouldn't have expected or hadn't known that she had gone through, and does it in such a way that I just feel like there's so much you can glean from this and so much you can learn from it, whether it's a compassion for other people or an understanding of what other people are going through, or if you know people who are going through things or have gone through things that she talks about in this book. I feel like there's a real opportunity, and I hate to use the word like learn, but I feel like there's a real opportunity to learn from her stories and from her honesty, which I very much enjoyed. And I also really liked her reflection back, you know, on Bring It On, and looking at that story and that character through, I want to say this came out in 2021, like through a 2021 lens, and the affection you can have for the movie, but the things she struggled with at the time, and just different conversations she had relayed with friends of hers at the time. And I just, again, very much enjoyed her as a storyteller. And she talks about when her teenage stepdaughter Zaya came out as transgender and really the steps they took to support her and how school supported her and how the community and everything that they did, and really hearing from Zaya's point of view. And I just found it a very interesting storyline also, in that Zaya to me just sounds like such a cool, confident person. And where, you know, Gabrielle Union talks about parts where she was really concerned, or Dwayne was really concerned about, you know, how the public was going to take things in, or the school, or friends of Zaya's, and Zaya was very much like, it's cool, it's fine, and how Zaya was educating Gabrielle Union on things. So I found that dynamic really interesting and that story really great. And then she talks a lot about aging, and she talks about mortality and sort of that reflection as well, but she talks about perimenopause, and she has like a really funny story about like chin hairs and like just really silly but honest and real things, but coming from just a perspective where I feel a lot of the time, you know, as a woman who's getting older, you don't always hear people talk about these things, or you don't always hear it with such honesty, and again, with such humor, but also, you know, things are changing, and she's older than her husband, so she's reflecting on it from that sense as well. And just, you know, your body is changing, and, you know, everything is changing. And I just really appreciated that she's putting it out there and she's starting a conversation. And I feel like I talked about this maybe like a long time ago with Stacey London from Who, What, Not Who, What, Where. What Not to Wear. Stacey London from What Not to Wear. But she's written multiple articles and she's been on a bunch of podcasts, and she talks about growing older and the struggles that is for a woman, in that nobody's talking about certain things, and what perimenopause is, and menopause, and sort of this midlife crisis that you're supposed to be having, but having like this midlife reinvention or revolution, and just hearing it more and more, because I feel like these are things that people don't really talk about. And I feel like a lot of what Gabrielle Union is talking about in her book are things that people don't always talk about. And again, just sort of the honesty that she comes to this book with, and that she talks about things with. There's not a lot of filter going on here, and I do appreciate that. So I would recommend both of the books. I think best to be read in order, because I think you get the context, because the second book definitely reflects back on things in the first. And she's also like, I think I kind of like owe you guys like a life update now that the first book has come out. So really, really enjoyed them both very much. And if she writes another one, I will absolutely be reading it. Next up is The Night She Went Missing by Kristen Bird. And if you guys saw the last vlog I did, I talked about this book then, because I was reading it then, but I finished it. I'm so off my mind today. It's daylight savings day, so I feel like my sleep deprivation weirdness has just like kicked in on overdrive. But anyway, finished this book and very much enjoyed it. So this was a debut novel. I bought this on a bit of a whim from Murder by the Book when I was ordering the Finley Donovan Knocks 'Em Dead pre-order. And I saw that Kristen Bird was also doing a pre-order personalized signing campaign through Murder Books. So I read about the book. I saw like some great things about it, some great early press. I really love the premise of it, and I was like, I'm just going to go for it, support the author, support the book, support the independent bookstore, and get myself a personalized pre-ordered copy, because why the heck not? And I very, very, very much enjoyed this book, so I'm glad I did it. So this is multiple points of view, multiple timelines. It's like all these things I love. There's a bit of a hint at a boarding school situation going on. And I was hooked. I was totally hooked by this story. So this follows a group of people who are living in Galveston, Texas. And our main character, we have like multiple main characters, so I feel like it's hard to say our main character. So we have 3 moms, and the daughter of one of the mothers, Emily, has gone missing. And when the book opens in the prologue, and I screwed this up when I was talking about it in my other video, in the prologue, we hear the point of view of Emily, who is the girl, the daughter, who has gone missing. And she is a senior in high school, and it's like this very fancy old money prep school in Galveston. There's a long-standing history, and sort of the history of the school and the island and everything play a big part in who all the players in the book are. But when the book opens, we hear the prologue of Emily, and she has just been found, and she has been presumed dead, and we sort of flip back in time then. So we start with the night that she is found, but just from her point of view. And then backwards we go to September, to the beginning of the school year. And we slowly build up to the night she went missing, hence the name. And then we get sort of the aftermath of figuring out what exactly happened. So we get a point of view of 3 of the different mothers. So Catherine is the mother of the girl who went missing. She has just recently come back to this town. This is her husband's hometown, and they have moved here when the book opens in flashback back to September. They've just recently moved to town. And then we get the point of view of a mother, Morgan, and she is the mom of a popular football player named Alex, who was the last person who was seen with Emily on the night that she went missing. And then the third mom is Leslie, and Leslie has a connection to Catherine's husband. She has a connection to the history on the island. She has a connection to the school. She has a daughter who is a senior in high school as well, who is part of Emily's friend group. And I was gonna say band. I don't know why. Part of her friend group. And these women were, you know, there were friendships between them, then there's some frenemies, there's some history obviously between them, and we get to see the varying perspective of things that are happening with them. And we get these very interesting points of view, whether it is, you know, it's the doubting your children and supporting your children and the lengths people will go to for their family. And as we sort of build up to, and we spend a lot of time, and when Emily has gone missing, we see the grief and we see the pain and we see the loss and we see the frustration and just sort of how all the parents are coping with things and how the town is coping with things. And it's a lot of secrets and lies and people holding things back. So this is a firmly grounded adult novel, even though we have the boarding school element. And again, Emily is a senior in high school. So her point of view is peppered in, not as frequently as the 3 moms are peppered in, but we have a little bit of police investigation because we're obviously trying to figure out what happened to Emily when the time comes. And you get some bit of, like, I would lightly call it amateur detective-ish, because Catherine is trying to find out what happened to her daughter and sort of piece together, did you even know your child? Like, do you really know what your kids are up to when you're not there? And the secrets they keep from you. And I just very much enjoyed the writing, the story, the pace. I had like full investment in what was going on with things. And it's definitely one of those books that, again, I feel like I said this in my other video too, where I'm like at such a stage where anytime I pick up a mystery, I'm like, everybody's a suspect. I'm like hyper analyzing so many people or thinking all sorts of things. And I just very much enjoyed it. I felt it was really satisfying. Again, a debut novel. I think it was very well written. I was here for the characters. I felt like there was enough distinction between the mom's point of view, which is going to make sense in a minute. I'll like comment on that further in half a second. But I felt like even though each chapter heading tells you you're with Catherine or you're with Morgan or you're with Leslie, I knew exactly who the moms were. I knew what their families were. I knew their point of views. I knew their stories. So I wasn't flipping to a new chapter and being like, wait, which one was Morgan again? Like, I knew them. So I felt like they were very distinct. I think she did a really good job with voice. I think she did a great job with the atmosphere and establishing our different characters. There was something I was suspicious of. There was something I did not even, it didn't even like cross my radar as like, maybe I should have been suspicious of it. And I just enjoyed the whole story, like all in. So I will definitely be picking up more things by Kristen Bird. I was very curious to see what she does next. And I really loved it. I really enjoyed it. I am always pleasantly surprised when a new author pleasantly surprises me. Like when you go in with no expectations. So you talk about like brand new author. I picked this up basically right after it came in the mail. So again, I had read like a little bit of early blurb on it, but nothing concrete. So I went in kind of blind to it in that sense and was just thoroughly enjoyable. So super psyched about it. Highly recommend it. And yeah, like I said, I love it when a book, I mean, like, who doesn't love it when they love a book? But I love it when something new comes across your plate and you thoroughly love it. And then the book that I wound up DNFing at the end of the month because it was starting to put me in a slump and I was trying to motor through. So I would consider it a soft DNF at this point because I feel like there might have been a few different factors at play which is why I struggled with it. But it's The Best of Friends by Lucinda Berry. So I have mentioned this book multiple times. Again, I talked about it in that vlog also because I was reading it then. And when I had heard about this book, it reminded me, I was like, I know I totally have a book like that on my shelf. I should read it. So I was totally in that mode of the moms and the different points of view, and like something happens with their kids and does it bring them together, like bring the moms together or break them apart, and the whole community aspect of it all. So I dove into this book, and this, again, I knew not a ton about it beyond what I read on the back, and I had heard some people say it's great. So like the blurb on the back says they were living the dream until it became a nightmare. So we have best friends Lindsay, Kendra, and Danny, and a tragic accident befalls their teenage sons, leaving one dead, another in a coma, and a third too traumatized to speak. So these three ladies have known each other their entire lives. They live in the same town. And when the book opens, we learn of this terrible accident. Their three teenage sons are also the best of friends. And like I just said, one is dead, one is in a coma, and one is too traumatized to speak. And this was definitely so much heavier going in than I realized. And I understand saying this now, that sounds kind of silly because you're dead, coma, too traumatized to speak. Maybe I should have seen it coming, but I already put them down. I also started the month with Freak and Creep, which were pretty dark. So this was much more emotionally heavy, like right out of the gate. And the grief and the weight of the book was a lot. But that is not something that turned me off from it. What I really struggled with is we are introduced to so many characters. I eventually like made a post-it note of like my own little family tree, and I did it twice because the first time I started writing names down, I had them wrong because I was still so confused. So we have the three moms, we have their three teenage sons, we have their three husbands, and then each one of the families has 1 to 2 more children. And like all of these names get vomited on you within like the first 10 pages of the book, I feel like. And then we start switching point of views. I was so lost of who was who. And every time I started a new chapter, before I started writing stuff down, I would have to go back to the first chapter and be like, who's who? Okay. Then I ding dong, make the list like you would do in an Agatha Christie book. But every time I started a chapter, I made it to page 159 in this book of, wait for it, 272. So I'm a little bit more than halfway. I'm like 52%. I never started a chapter without having to go back to my note to figure out who was who. So I felt it slumping me out big time. I was getting frustrated with the physical reading of it. And I was so pulled out of the story by spending my time trying to figure out who I was even reading about. So I DNF'd it for now. I do want to go back to it because I do think the storyline was interesting. And I also want to know what happened that night because we haven't gotten that far yet. But I don't know if anybody else has read this and struggled with it, but I didn't feel like the writing of the moms was distinct enough. And I just, like I said, there was just like way too much character soup, like right out of the gate, that I didn't feel like anything was established of who was who. Like there were just way too many names, and there's doctors and there's physical therapists and there's like other people in town. Like it was just way too much for me. So I will say, on a personal level, when I started to read this, a bunch of stuff sort of like turned at work and like definitely distracted me and set me into a zone on that side of things. And the past like 1 or 2 weeks, I would say, have not been my finest hour. It's just been a bit of a struggle lately with just so many different things popping. So it could have been that, but I will talk about it in next month's wrap up because I read it in March. After I read this, I jumped into The Club by Ellery Lloyd, which just came out, and that is a multiple point of view. It's a bunch of people on an island. It's kind of like an And Then There Were None type of thing. So it's set from the perspective of the people who work at this very exclusive resort. And it's an opening weekend and all these celebrities come and like everything goes south. Loved it. Super dark, loved it. But you got multiple point of views. I think there were like 5 of them, kind of very in a Lucy Foley-ish type of way. And after I sort of read through the first round of who everybody was and then got to the second round, and then I would have to be like, oh wait, who? Okay, yeah, Jess works in housekeeping. But then I was fine and I plowed through that book and I loved it. So I don't think it was the multiple point of view thing. But it was just something that wasn't working for me at the time. But I will go back to it. That is my game plan. Let me know if you guys have read this and what your thoughts on it are. But that was how my month ended, which was a bit of a bummer. But I'm glad I did pull the ripcord when I did, because I can't be in a reading slump. I just love it too much. I cannot put myself into a slump. So that's how I ended my month. So that's going to do it for everything I read in February. Like I said, let me know if you read Best of Friends. Let me know anything or everything you want to let me know down below. Best of the month, worst of the month. Are you as excited for Jennifer Hillier as I am? And we can talk about it down below. But thank you guys so much, as always, for hanging out today, spending part of your time with me. I really, really appreciate it. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. Like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff down below if you're so inclined. And I will see you guys in another video really soon. Bye, everybody.